The day Aminu Ibrahim came to his own wedding on a bicycle, the entire compound went silent. Then they laughed. Not a small laugh. A real one. The kind that spreads through a crowd like fire through dry grass, starting at the gate, moving to the women sitting near the entrance, reaching the men standing under the canopy, finally arriving at the high table where the bride's family sat in their finest clothes with their finest expressions. Someone said, "Is that the groom?" Someone else said, "On a bicycle?" And a third voice, louder, less careful, "God have mercy on that girl." The bicycle was old. Not decoratively old, not vintage old. Just old. The kind of bicycle that had lived a full life of hard use. The chain had been recently oiled, you could see that, and the seat had been wiped clean. But it was, unmistakably, a regular bicycle ridden by a regular man. Aminu parked it carefully near the gate. He straightened his kaftan, white, simple, beautifully made, the only expensive thing visible about him. He walked toward the entrance of the wedding venue. He did not rush. He did not look at the people who were laughing. He simply walked with the calm, unhurried stride of a man who knew exactly where he was going and was not troubled by what anyone thought about how he was getting there. The bride's father, Chief Salasa Dangana, stood near the entrance with an expression carved from pure stone. He had agreed to this marriage reluctantly. He had agreed because his daughter, Fatima, had refused every other option he had presented with a stubbornness that had defeated him completely. But looking at this man, this calm, bicycle-riding man in a plain kaftan walking toward him on the morning of his daughter's wedding, he felt a very specific kind of regret. Aminu reached the entrance. He greeted the chief with full, respectful formality. Chief Dangana returned the greeting stiffly. Aminu walked inside. Somewhere in a side room, Fatima was being dressed for the ceremony. She would not see the bicycle. She would not see the crowd's laughter. But she would hear about it later. Everyone would make sure she heard about it later. What nobody knew, not Chief Dangana, not the laughing crowd, not even Fatima yet, was that the bicycle was not the whole story. It was never the whole story. And before this wedding day was over, every single person who had laughed at that gate was going to understand exactly what they had failed to see. Stay with me. The Dangana family of Kaduna was the kind of family that took its position in the world very seriously. Chief Salasa Dangana had built his name over 30 years in construction and government contracts. He was not the wealthiest man in the state. But he was well connected, well respected, and deeply conscious of what the family name meant in every room it entered. He had 3 daughters. The first, Hawa, had married a prominent banker from Abuja. Large wedding. Important guests. The kind of marriage that generated approving nods in every gathering for 2 years afterward. The second, Zulai, had married a doctor. Not as wealthy as the banker, but respectable. Educated. The family had been satisfied. The third was Fatima. And Fatima had always been the complicated one. Not complicated in behavior, she was, by every measure, the quietest and most composed of the 3 sisters. She did not argue loudly. She did not cause scenes. She simply had the deeply inconvenient habit of knowing exactly what she wanted, and the even more inconvenient habit of not wanting what her family expected her to want. She had turned down 2 arranged introductions before Aminu. The first was a young man from a wealthy Kano family who had spoken to her for 20 minutes and spent 19 of those 20 minutes describing his cars. The second was a businessman from Lagos who had arrived for the introduction in a convoy of 3 SUVs and had addressed most of his conversation to her father rather than to her. Both times, Chief Dangana had been furious. Both times, Fatima had been immovable. "I want to marry someone who sees me," she had said to her mother, Hajiya Ramatu, after the second refusal. Not someone who sees the family. Not someone who sees a wife-shaped object to complete their household. Someone who actually sees me. Hajiya Ramatu had understood, in the quiet way of mothers who have paid attention. Chief Dangana had understood nothing of the kind. She had met Aminu at a professional development seminar 18 months before the wedding. He was sitting 2 seats away from her, taking notes on paper rather than a laptop, in the focused, unhurried way she would come to associate entirely with him. The seminar was about urban infrastructure development, a topic Fatima cared about deeply, having spent 2 years working with an NGO focused on community development projects in northern Nigeria. During the discussion session, Aminu had made a point about the relationship between road infrastructure and small business growth in rural communities that was so precisely accurate and so thoroughly thought through that she had written it down before she registered that she was doing so. After the session, she had introduced herself. He had shaken her hand, told her his name, just his first name, and they had talked for 45 minutes about infrastructure, about the specific failures of rural development policy, about what she had seen in her fieldwork and what he had observed in his. He had not told her what he did. She had not asked, because the conversation had moved too quickly and too well for that kind of interruption. She had gone home thinking about the conversation. She had gone home thinking about him. They had met again, twice, at similar events over the following months. Always talking. Always the same quality of conversation, specific, honest, mutually engaged. He had eventually asked if he could call her. She had said yes. 3 months of calls. Then meetings. Then something that neither of them formally named but both of them understood completely. When he came to formally seek her hand, he came to the house in the same way he did everything, calmly, without performance, with full traditional respect for the process but no performance of wealth he didn't display. He came alone. Not in a convoy. Not with an entourage. He drove himself in a modest car. He greeted the family with complete propriety. He answered Chief Dongana's questions directly and honestly. He said he worked in business. He said he was building something. He said the details of what he was building he would share fully once they had agreed in principle to the union. Chief Dongana had not liked this. Chief Dongana had liked almost nothing about Aminu Ibrahim, his lack of visible wealth, his calm that could be mistaken for arrogance, his refusal to expand on questions he felt had not yet earned a full answer. But Fatima had sat across from her father that evening and looked at him with an expression that he had only seen twice before in his life, once on her mother's face, once on his own mother's. The expression of a woman who has decided. He had given his reluctant agreement. And now here they were. Wedding morning. A bicycle at the gate. A crowd of guests who would be talking about this for months. The wedding venue was a large events center on the better side of Kaduna. Chief Dongana had insisted on a grand ceremony. Whatever he thought of the groom, the Dongana name required a certain level of presentation. The hall was decorated properly. The food was arranged. The musicians were hired. Guests from Abuja, Kano, Lagos had been invited. There would be nothing lacking on the Dongana side. What the groom's side brought was another matter. Aminu's family was small and arrived quietly. His mother, a dignified woman named Hajiya Maryam, in beautiful but simple lace. 2 older brothers who looked, frankly, like slightly older versions of Aminu, calm, unhurried, wearing good traditional clothing but nothing that announced itself. No convoy. No large entourage. No conspicuous displays of anything. Chief Dongana stood with his friends near the high table and kept his expression controlled with visible effort. His friend, Alhaji Bacha, leaned toward him. Your son-in-law's family is very modest. Chief Dongana said nothing. His sister, Hajiya Aisha, had less restraint. She had appeared at his side shortly after the bicycle incident. Salisu. That boy came on a bicycle. A bicycle. What does this mean? What kind of man? Enough, Chief Dongana said sharply. But his jaw was tight. The women's section was its own theater. The news of the bicycle had reached the women's section within minutes of Aminu's arrival. Fatima's sister Hawa found her in the dressing room while the final preparations were being made. Fatima, she said carefully. Have you heard? Heard what? Fatima said, not looking up from the mirror where her aunt was adjusting her headpiece. You're Aminu. He arrived on a bicycle. Fatima looked at Hawa in the mirror. I know, she said. Hawa blinked. You know? He told me he would, Fatima said simply. He said his car was in for service and he didn't want to borrow someone else's just to perform. He said a bicycle was honest transport and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise for one morning. Hawa stared at her. And you were fine with that? I thought it was funny, Fatima said. And honest. Fatima. People are laughing. Let them, Fatima said. She turned back to the mirror. Are you going to help me with this headpiece or not? Hawa stood there for a moment longer. Then she sat down and helped with the headpiece. Because that was Fatima. She had always been that. Immovable, in the quietest possible way. The ceremony itself was everything a proper Hausa wedding should be. The religious rites were conducted with full dignity. The families sat in their proper positions. The words were spoken. And then Aminu and Fatima were formally wed. When Fatima walked into the main hall for the reception portion of the ceremony, she found her husband already seated at the high table. He looked at her as she approached. That look, she had seen it before. The one that said, I see you specifically. Not the dress or the occasion or the family name. You. She sat beside him. Bicycle, she said quietly, so only he could hear. Honest transport, he said, just as quietly. She suppressed a smile. Around them, the reception buzzed. Music, food, the specific electricity of a wedding crowd. But under the surface, the whispers. The comparisons. The calculations being run by people who measured everything in visible currency. Fatima heard none of it. Or rather, she heard it and let it pass through her without stopping. Her husband sat beside her, calm and fully present, and that was the only thing in the room that mattered to her. The first real moment of open hostility came from an unexpected direction. Fatima's cousin, Musa Dangana Chief Dongana's nephew, who had arrived from Abuja in a large SUV with tinted windows and had been visibly displeased all morning, found his way to a seat near the groom's family during the reception. He was a type that existed in every large family, the one who had done moderately well and parlayed that moderate success into a permanent performance of superiority over anyone he deemed beneath him. He sat beside Aminu's older brother, Kabru, and spoke just loudly enough to be heard by several nearby tables. So, Musa said pleasantly. What business did you say your brother is in? Kabru looked at him steadily. I didn't say. Ah. Musa smiled. Modest family. He looked at Aminu's side of the room. Very modest. You know, in our family we believe in transparency. If a man wants to marry a Dangana daughter, the family should know exactly what he is bringing. He paused. A bicycle is not. Musa. Kabaru's voice was quiet and even. Eat your food. Musa blinked. He was not accustomed to being interrupted so flatly. He opened his mouth to respond. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. It was his business partner in Abuja calling, unusual for a weekend afternoon. He excused himself. He was gone for 11 minutes. When he came back, his expression had changed completely. He sat down and said nothing. He picked up his food and ate in silence for the remainder of the reception. Nobody at his table understood why. They would understand later. It started not with a dramatic announcement but with a series of small, rippling moments, the kind that spread through a room in waves before anyone understands the source. The first wave. A man arrived at the venue 2 hours into the reception. He was well-dressed, senior-looking, with the composed manner of someone who occupied serious professional spaces. He spoke to the event coordinator briefly at the door, was directed inside, and walked directly to the groom's table. He did not look like a guest. He greeted Aminu with the specific deference that is difficult to perform convincingly and therefore almost never faked. Not a friend's greeting. Not a colleague's greeting. The greeting of someone who reports to someone. They spoke briefly. Aminu nodded twice. The man left. People who noticed it and said nothing, because they didn't yet have context to attach to what they had seen. The second wave. Chief Dongana's phone rang. He was at the high table. He almost didn't answer. It was his wedding reception, and he had made a policy of not taking calls during family events. But the name on the screen was the governor of Kaduna State. He answered. The call lasted 3 minutes. When he came back to his seat, his wife Hajiya Ramata looked at his face and felt something shift in her understanding of the day. "What is it?" she said quietly. He looked at his new son-in-law. "I will tell you later," he said. His expression was no longer stone. It was something she had not seen on his face in a very long time. It was something close to wonder. The third wave. Alhaji Bacha, Chief Dongana's friend, the one who had made the comment about the modest family, had excused himself during the reception to take a business call of his own. He had returned looking like a man who had been told something that required him to sit down and think carefully. He caught Chief Dongana's eye across the room. He gave a very small, very significant nod. Chief Dongana held his gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Aminu again. Aminu was talking to Fatima. Quietly. Whatever they were saying, she was smiling the way she had smiled before today, the specific private smile that had nothing to do with the public occasion around her. The Ibrahim family of Kano. If you worked in West African finance, manufacturing, or agriculture, you knew that name. If you worked in infrastructure development across northern Nigeria, you knew that name better than most. If you sat on the board of any of the 14 companies that formed the Ibrahim Group, you knew that name the way you knew your own. The patriarch, Alhaji Musa Ibrahim, had built his first business in the 1970s, a groundnut trading operation that had slowly, patiently, over 40 years, become one of the largest diversified conglomerates in the region. Agriculture, manufacturing, banking, infrastructure, energy. He had 4 sons. The 3 eldest had each taken a division of the group and built it further. The youngest, Aminu, had spent 5 years abroad, studying, then working, then building. He had returned 2 years ago with a quiet determination and a very specific mandate from his father: build the infrastructure division from the ground level up. Not inheriting it. Building it. The bicycle was not poverty. The bicycle was a man who had spent 2 years driving through construction sites and community development projects in vehicles suited to that work, and who had, at some point, developed the habit of using a bicycle for short urban distances because it was faster, cleaner, and because he had simply stopped thinking about what it looked like to the kind of people who were always watching what things looked like. He had forgotten, for one wedding morning, that other people had not stopped thinking about it. Or rather, he hadn't forgotten. He just hadn't cared. Fatima had known who he was from the 4th month of their relationship. Not because he had told her, he had not then. Because she had looked him up. Not to verify his wealth. Not to run calculations about the future. But because she was a careful person who paid attention, and the quality of his thinking about infrastructure and development had nagged at her until she placed it in a context that made sense. She had found the context. She had sat with it for a week. And then she had called him. Ibrahim Group, she had said. A pause on the line. Yes, he had said. You could have told me, she said. I wanted you to know me first, he said. The rest is a lot. It tends to become the whole thing, if people know it too early. I didn't want it to become the whole thing with you. She had thought about this. I understand that, she said. But we can't build something real on incomplete information. Agreed, he said. That's why I'm telling you now. Everything. Whatever you want to know. They had talked for 4 hours that night. She had asked questions. He had answered them: the business, the family, the expectations, the complications. All of it. She had asked him one more question before they ended the call. If I had known from the first day, do you think I would have seen you differently? Yes, he said honestly. So would I, she said. That had settled something between them. The rest of the relationship had been built on ground that was fully known. 3 hours into the reception, Chief Dangana asked to speak to Aminu privately. They found a quiet room off the main hall. A storage room, essentially, with chairs brought in and a door closed against the noise outside. Chief Dangana looked at his son-in-law. He was a man who had spent 30 years in business and politics and had developed a very accurate internal instrument for evaluating people. He trusted that instrument. He could not understand why his instrument had given him the reading it had when he'd met Amina, something important, something real, while everything visible about the man had suggested the opposite of importance. He wanted to reconcile that. I received a call from the governor, he said. I know, Amina said. My father wanted to call himself. I asked him to hold that for after today. I wanted the day to be about Fatima and me, not about announcements. Chief Dangana was quiet. The Ibrahim Group, he said. Yes. Your father is Al-Haji Musa Ibrahim. Yes. Chief Dangana folded his hands. He was a man who had spent 30 years knowing exactly where he stood in every room. He was adjusting his understanding of every room he had ever shared with this young man and finding the adjustment uncomfortable. Why, he said carefully, did you arrive today on a bicycle? Amina looked at him steadily. Because my car was genuinely in for service, he said. And because I have been riding bicycles for 2 years on work sites and I didn't think twice about it. He paused. I understand that was a mistake in the context of this occasion. I did not intend to disrespect you or your family. And your family's position, Chief Dangana said. Why was this not communicated to me before now? I asked my family to wait, Amina said. Because I have watched, many times in my life, what happens when the Ibrahim name enters a conversation early. Every relationship, personal, professional, gets filtered through it. I wanted to know that Fatima wanted me. I wanted you to evaluate me before you evaluated my family's portfolio. He paused. I understand that is not how these things are usually done. Chief Dangana was silent for a long moment. You could have trusted me, he said finally. Could I? Amina said quietly. You disapproved of me for 8 months based on what you could see. Would the Ibrahim name have changed that, or just the reason you allowed the marriage? The question sat in the small room between them. Chief Dangana had no answer that was fully comfortable. Because the honest answer, and he was, fundamentally, an honest man, was that yes. The name would have changed things. The calculation would have been different. And Amina had known that. And had chosen a different path. He looked at his son-in-law. He looked at him the way he should have looked at him from the beginning. Not as an object of evaluation. As a person. My daughter, he said slowly, chose more carefully than I gave her credit for. Amina said nothing. But something in his expression accepted this. Welcome to this family, Chief Dangana said. It came out differently than it had on the day of the formal acceptance. Fuller. Less reluctant. Amina bowed his head respectfully. Thank you, Baba. The news moved through the reception the way all important news moves through a crowd, not from one central announcement, but from person to person, in whispers that grew louder and louder until they were barely whispers at all. Someone had Googled. Someone else had called a contact. A third person had received a text from someone in Kano who had seen the guest list posted to a family group. By the 4th hour of the reception, the atmosphere in the hall had fundamentally changed. The same guests who had laughed at the bicycle at the gate were now wearing expressions that ranged from stunned to deeply, privately embarrassed. Musa Dangana, the cousin from Abuja with the tinted SUV, had not returned to his table after his phone call. He had found a seat on the periphery of the room and was eating quietly and making himself as unremarkable as possible, which was difficult given how remarkable he had been making himself all morning. The woman who had said God have mercy on that girl was now sitting very still, replaying the exact volume at which she had said it and calculating how many people had heard. Al-Haji Bacha sought out Chief Dangana's ear during a musical interlude. That is Al-Haji Musa Ibrahim's son, he said, unnecessarily. I know, Chief Dangana said. The infrastructure division of Ibrahim Group alone is. I know, Bacha. And he arrived on a bicycle. Chief Dangana looked at his friend. It appears, he said, that we have all spent this morning revealing our priorities very clearly. He picked up his drink. I would prefer we stop discussing the bicycle now. Later that evening, when the reception was winding down and guests were beginning to leave, Fatima found a quiet moment beside her husband. The hall was emptying. The musicians were packing up. The decorations looked different in the quieter light, more human, less performance. They know, she said. Yes, he said. How do you feel? He considered this genuinely. The same as I felt this morning. The morning hasn't changed. What people think about it has. She looked at him. My father spoke to you. He did. And? He's a good man, Aminu said. He needed to see me differently before he could treat me differently. That's human. I understand it. You're very forgiving. I'm not forgiving, he said. I just find it easier to understand people's motivations when I'm not surprised by them. He paused. I knew what this morning would be. I knew what people would think when they saw the bicycle. I could have borrowed a car. I chose not to. Why? She asked. He looked at her. Because you already knew everything, he said. The Ibrahim Group. The money. The family. The complications that come with all of it. You knew it, and you sat at that table today looking at me exactly the same way you've looked at me since the first time we talked about infrastructure at that seminar. He paused. I didn't need to perform for you. I didn't want to perform for anyone else. A slight smile. The bicycle was me refusing to perform. She was quiet for a moment. Your father, she said. When is he coming to greet my family? Next weekend, he said. He wanted to give today to us. She nodded. Next weekend will be a different kind of meeting, she said. Completely different, he agreed. She laughed softly. My father is going to spend the whole week preparing, she said. I know, he said. I'm sorry for that. I'm not, she said. He needs it. It'll be good for him. He looked at her with that look again, specific, direct, completely present. Fatima, he said. Yes. Thank you for not making me perform. She took his hand. Thank you, she said, for being exactly who you said you were. The morning after the wedding, a photograph appeared in a prominent Nigerian business news publication. It had been taken by someone at the reception, not professionally, just on a phone. It showed the bicycle parked at the gate of the wedding venue. Beside it, barely visible in the background, was a wedding banner with the family names. The caption read, *Ibrahim Group heir married in Kaduna yesterday. Arrived for ceremony on bicycle. The internet has questions. *. The photograph was shared 11,000 times before noon. The comments were predictable in their range. Some people found it funny. Some found it admirable. Some found it suspicious. Surely it was deliberate, a staged humility, a performance of its own kind. Aminu saw the photograph. He read some of the comments. He put his phone down. Fatima, who was sitting across the breakfast table, watched him. Leave it, she said. I know, he said. People will think what they think. I know that too. She poured his tea. He picked it up. Outside, Kaduna was going about its morning. Traffic. The calls to prayer still faintly audible from the window. The specific ordinary noise of a city waking up. Inside, two people sat at a breakfast table in the first morning of a life they had chosen on their own terms. The bicycle was parked downstairs. He would ride it to the construction site he was visiting that afternoon. It would cause no comment there. It never had. 6 months after the wedding, the Ibrahim Group broke ground on its largest infrastructure project in northern Nigeria, a road network expansion that would connect 14 rural communities to major urban centers in 3 states. The groundbreaking ceremony was attended by 3 state governors, multiple federal officials, international development partners, and enough press that the event trended online for most of the afternoon. Amina stood at the front with a shovel. Beside him stood Fatima, holding their project documentation, having joined the infrastructure division in a formal capacity 3 months before, her own expertise in community development making her exactly the kind of voice the project needed on the ground. Chief Dangana sat in the front row of the official guests. He watched his daughter stand beside her husband at the podium, speaking to a crowd of hundreds about the specific communities this road network would transform, communities she had worked in, knew by name, had documented needs for. He listened to her speak. He thought about the morning 6 months ago. The bicycle at the gate. The crowd's laughter. His own stone expression. He thought about the 45 seconds he had spent evaluating his son-in-law at the gate and the conclusion he had reached. He thought about how completely he had been wrong, not about who Amina was, but about the instruments he had used to measure him. After the ceremony, he found Aminu in the crowd. He placed his hand on his son-in-law's shoulder. "The project is important," he said. "What you and Fatima are building here, it matters." "Thank you, Baba," Amina said. "I have a question," Chief Dangana said. "Yes?" "The bicycle." He paused. "Do you still ride it?" Aminu smiled. "Every day." Chief Dangana shook his head slowly. But he was smiling too. A real smile. The kind that costs something to give, which means it is worth something when it arrives. "Good," he said. He did not explain why he said good. He didn't need to. Some things, by the end of a story, explain themselves. He came to his wedding on a bicycle. Not because he had nothing. But because he had something most people spend their whole lives searching for. A woman who had already seen past the bicycle. Past the name. Past everything on the surface. And had simply chosen him. He was just returning the favor. The end.